absolute pleasure to see you. So we are the CIPR ESG expert panel, and thanks so much for coming to our first event of 2025. So just to give you a bit of background, my name is Susie Giles. I chair the panel. The panel was set up towards the end of 2023, which basically brought together professionals who work in sustainability communications and have a background in all things ESG. And we came together to really help the CIPR have a voice and a line of support for communications professionals who are looking for advice and guidance around all things to do with sustainability communications. Part of that work is running events like these. The other part is that we have produced some skills guides, which some of you may have seen last year. We've actually just updated those guides because, as you probably are all aware, that this business moves quite quickly. So those new guides should be out on the CIPR website the week of the 10th of February, but keep an eye out because we'll send a message out on all of our channels. Um, but thanks so much for joining us today. I'm probably ahead of everybody on this call because I am now based in New Zealand. So for me, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So I think I'm doing quite well. Um, but luckily, my lovely panelists today are much more awake than me. So I will hand over to my lovely colleague, who is also a key member of our ESG panel, Jihan, and also founder and leader of Communique agency. And she will be chairing our panel today. So Jihan, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I mean, it is dedication, to be fair, to wake up at 1
It
o'clock.
is.
So yes, you're more dedicated than I am, I tell you that. Hi, everyone, and it's wonderful to have you with us. As Susie said, my name is Jihan Hyde. I'll introduce myself in a second. But I just wanted to welcome you all and thank our esteemed panelists for joining us today. They are from different regions, so I'm really grateful for everyone to be here today. As you know, transitioning from from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable energy-based economy is going to take time. And as any transition takes time, we don't have time, to be honest. For us to become carbon neutral by 2050, we need a lot of collaboration, we need technology, we need regulations, and most importantly, we need mindset changing. And this is where we come in as well as communicators to help, spearhead the people and planet agenda. Everything takes time. I mean, Janata has shared a very interesting fact that when we transitioned from coal-based economy to fossil fuel and oil economy, it took us 50 to 60 years, and that was in the 20th century. So this, for me, that was an eye-opener. Regulations play a massive role in shaping the narrative for us as communicators and for organizations when they are reporting. So this is why we're here today. We're here to explore how regulations play a massive role, and specifically the recent regulations such as the CSRD, which is the carbon I forgot now what it stands for. It will come to me, I promise you. And the ISSB regulations, which stands for the International Sustainability Standard Board. All of these, and the EU taxonomy. So all of these regulations are going to shape how we communicate and what we could communicate. But without further ado, I would ask my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. And then after that, I'll introduce myself, after which we then open the webinar by having the first half hour. I'll ask questions to the panelists. and then we ask you to ask questions as well. So please don't be shy. Do ask as many questions. Write them down for us in the comments so that we can manage it. My colleague Rennie here is going to help us as well manage the webinar. So let's begin. We'll start with Rasha. Rasha, hi. Would you mind introducing yourself for us?
Yes, thank you so much, Jihan. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone around the globe. My name is Rasha Al-Rawaf, and I'm coming to you live today from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs and Sustainability Officer at Aqua Power, the largest water desalination private company in the world, a leader in renewable energy, and the first mover in green hydrogen. But I have a caveat to add is that I come from a conventional energy background, so 22 years in conventional energy, and now working with Aqua Power. Glad to be here today. Thank you, Jihan.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Rasha. Janata.
Thank you, Jihan. My name is Janata Fadilakova. Hello, everybody. As Rasha said, I love that. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So I'll take that. My name is Janata Fadilakova. As I said, I'm a director of an expert consultancy, Planet Law Lab, where I help my clients with especially climate and nature risks. And the reason I'm here today is because I'm also a qualified lawyer, and with communication, the shift that we have seen over the past 5 years or so has been from the marketing and general website communication being something that was not really legally risky to a point where everything that communicators say today is becoming a massive legal risk. And I'm here to clarify the context of these legal risks for you.
Thank you, Janata. But last but not least, Nana.
Thank you. Thank you, Jihan. I'm Nana Hemerson, the Global Marketing Director with Nat Power. And so we have Nat Power UK, we have Nat Power Marine, we have Nat Power H for our hydrogen. We're basically a business that's walking the talk when it comes to driving energy transition around the world, and also in key industries like obviously energy and maritime sector. So I have 18 years experience in marketing, brand development, innovation, communication, as well as sustainability thought leader. And, one of the things after a lot of my early years in marketing, I decided to say, I'm going to take my power for being able to convince consumers to buy stuff they don't need to use it for good in order to drive sustainable behavior change. As the United Nations says that one of the biggest barrier to fighting climate change is actually sustainable behavior change in people. So as much as we tackle institutions, businesses, and so on and so forth, they're all made up of people. So that's where I tend to focus as much as possible, make it simple, easier, in order to get to where people say, okay, I can do this, and, make it accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Nana. Last but not least, me. I am Jihan Hyde, as Susie has kindly said. I am the founder and CEO of Communique. We are an ESG stakeholder engagement consultancy based in the UK, but we do have presence in the Middle East and in Europe as well. In addition to advising our clients on how to engage effectively with their stakeholders, whether they're employees, communities, or suppliers on their ESG agenda pre and post design, we also train board members on what role do they play in the process and how do they integrate sustainability within their decision-making process as well. But my true passion lies in tutoring and lecturing. So I lecture at Oxford University. I lectured a course called Sustainable Cooperation. I also teach at the CIPR. I teach the courses that are around ESG communication strategy design and ESG in internal communication. And finally, I also teach at Bocconi University in Milan on sustainable brands. So that is us in a nutshell. For those of you who just joined, welcome, and please do ask questions in the sideboard or the side panel so that we can answer them later on. Janata, I'm going to start with you actually, because For me, regulations are key. I do like a regulation sometimes because it does put me into place. So in your opinion and in your experience, how does the global regulations are coming in, such as the CSRD, the ISSB, and the EU taxonomy, is impacting the organizations at this moment of time, whether they're located in Europe or globally?
Thank you, Jihan. So, the first word that came to mind when you said that was confusion. I think everybody's confused, and there are several reasons, and I just want to vocalize them so that we all know that we are not alone, and then give you my take as a lawyer on what this could mean. So I think the confusion comes from some of them are voluntary, such as ISSB, but they're going to influence the regulations that are being adopted, especially we see it in Canada, for example, and also Asia. And then Europe. Europe is historically the most active regulator in everything, from 10 years ago data to now sustainability and ESG. So Europe is already on the regulatory track. Very much what you said with Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I'm sure the acronym SUP is known to most of us and oftentimes forgotten by most of us, very much like you, Jihan, very, very understandably. And right now we are in a moment where EU regulated, and there was a call for a simplification. So what is happening in the EU is this omnibus simplification packet, which should be with us by the end of February, and it should simplify different overlaps between CSRD and CSDDD and EU taxonomy. So right now we are in this like wait and see period. And this is where I get a lot of questions like, what do we do? And like, you have to wait and see. That's one method. But also people, and especially big corporations, are seeking clarification and the biggest question, I think, especially after the US elections and inauguration now in January, is ESG going away? That's a big question. And that's the one I really want to address. What does this all mean? This chaos right now. How do you find clarity in the chaos as much as you can? So I like to address it by looking at three markets: this US, Europe, and China. Now, US, we all know, is experiencing huge ESG backlash through the, scraping of a lot of policies and laws at the federal level that happened just this month. And it's likely to continue for the next 4 years. We have to be very clear about it. However, so California, New York, and also Illinois are states that are actually progressing their disclosure rules and their policies towards much more ambition than the federal government is. Downsizing, if you will, on ESG, but you also need regulates at some stages. And currently we have a lot of regulation coming from EU that will be simplified, but EU is not going to go away. EU is not going to back on the regulatory frameworks that have been under development for 10 plus years. What we will see is simplification, which is good for all of us, but we will not see a backlash in the EU. And China, because US and EU gives you this kind of like balancing scale. It's like, okay, so US is going away, maybe states will keep, the ambition. EU is definitely ambitiously regulating. So what about China? Where does China stand? And before I dive into this, I want to say China is this kind of enigma for most of us who sit out, which comes from China. And my knowledge of China comes from my work with people and clients in China. And that's where a lot of perhaps my positivity for ESG comes from as well, because what I have seen from this work, from work actually in the country itself, so the reports are not coming from, Western media reporting on China, but from the internal dynamics. So what I've seen there was incredible ambition to follow EU. So my role in a lot of these engagements actually train Chinese government officials on EU regulation and how EU is approaching sustainability. And looking at, okay, is this fit for us? Is something similar to CSRD fit for China, or do we have to make it different because we are, a big country, we have individual provinces? Interestingly as well, China is doubling down on nature and biodiversity. For them, climate action is much harder to justify because they're still in the development process. But biodiversity action is much easier because it's local. It doesn't need coordination across the globe. And it's beneficial for the country itself because the restoration of your national biodiversity within your country means benefits to your country in terms of resilience, health of the people. So currently, China has already unveiled certain standards for corporate disclosures, for example, of certain large companies. And those standards are modeled on the analysis of what EU is doing. So while not yet at the same level of ambition as EU, the direction of travel is very clear in China too. And when you look at those three massive markets in the world, EU, China, and US, the conclusion is that sustainability is not going to go away. It's going to advance. And the regulation might shift, but they are still pointing you towards more responsible business, more business that actually looks at its ESG impacts and opportunities, impacts, risks, and opportunities, reports on them openly and publicly, and therefore needs clear communication from people like all of you on this call.
Well, China is the largest producer of wind turbine in the world at this moment of time. And for whoever don't know what China is, I mean, China definitely has been in everyone's mind recently because of DeepSeek and how the new AI model is going to reduce the energy consumption that is keeping us at nighttime because of using AI when we're reporting using ESG AI. So, okay, so Janata, but still, should we worry? Should we worry about how we should be communicating because of all of these regulations that are coming? And is there any tips that we need to be aware of, or any advice that we need to be aware of when we are communicating?
So usually it's not healthy for you, first of all. Like the kind of basis is worrying is not healthy for any of us. And the way to remove, but I completely understand, like we all worry at some stages. The way to remove worry is to work with competent people, right? To make sure that the advice you get is competent. And there are certain good hallmarks of that advice. So we know that sustainability communication has become legally risky, which means talking to lawyers who know what they're talking about and know how to advise you is really, really important. And I know historically that wasn't done. And sometimes it's really hard to get budgets for it. I, have these things with all my clients, but there is a business case you can make, which is there is a liability risk attached because you can get sued for greenwashing. And to remove that risk means to work with the lawyers who can help you navigate that language in your communication and make it as ambitious as you want it, because you should get credit for what you are doing, but also mitigate that liability risk. So working with lawyers is, I think, fundamental at this stage where we have got in sustainability. Overarching, especially for multinationals, I want to say, if you have to comply with several frameworks of several regulators, or some of them that are not yet mandated but are voluntary, like ISSB, good thing is to think about complying with the most ambitious framework, which currently CSRD. And then once you have your report, for example, you can adjust it to those all less ambitious frameworks. And then it's also actually, it lowers your legal costs, because what happens is lawyers will then only adjust from the top down, from the more ambitious framework into a less ambitious framework. And that's probably cost-wise much more efficient than complying with everybody and not knowing actually what is the highest standard. But also in terms of your operational ease, it's much easier to comply with the most ambitious and then lower the ambitions according to the other ones. And the final thing I want to say is, even if currently we have this uncertainty, which is making everybody worry, uncertainty is attached to the regulation. Obviously in US, the lack of it currently, because everything has been scraped. In EU, the complexity, which is hopefully going to get simplified next month. However, regulation is not the only thing that we lawyers use to give you advice. Before there is regulation, there is a lot of precedent in case law. So even before CSRD and CSDDD, I was actually able to give my clients advice on how to use language in their communication on the basis of hundreds of years of case law that lawyers distill down into certain rules. Things like, your evidence has to align with how you present the evidence. It cannot be overstated. It cannot be understated. So even if you feel like in the regulatory mess and uncertainty, you can't really get competent advice, that's not actually true. You can, because the lawyers will base their advice on what exists. And there are hundreds of years of precedent in most jurisdictions that they can base their advice on. So even if there is no regulation, we can still give you some clarity and mitigate your risk.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I love lawyers, but sometimes they suck the life out of every
I
narrative.
know, which is why I always say, like, choose the right ones. And I'm not trying to, like, there are good lawyers and then there are lawyers who over worry you, right? There is a good lawyer is the lawyer that removed the worries.
Well, that's
right?
the thing. Some of them just really just destroy my narrative. Anyways, Russia. But thank you, Janata. Russia, going to you. You are based in the Middle East, and Aqua Power is a global organization. So how do you ensure that Aqua Power is aligned with the global sustainability goals while also keeping in mind that there are some region-specific challenges, specifically in the global south?
Sure. So one thing about Aqua Power is right now we are a global south to global south company. What that means is we are in the global south. We are a Saudi-based company that operates in the global south, and we bring investments in the global south. We are a publicly listed company, so our regulator is the Saudi Stock Exchange, Tadawun. And the Saudi Stock Exchange is informed, obviously, by other higher umbrellas of regulations. We have, for those of you that might not be aware or have not heard of, back in 2017, Vision 2030 was launched. And it's an initiative to diversify, improve quality of life. It's a transformation agenda for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And underneath the Vision 2030, there's also the Saudi Green Initiative. And the Saudi Green Initiative is what puts down the guidelines for companies and for the targets that we have as a country moving forward. So these are the guidelines that we follow. As a kingdom, Saudi Arabia's net zero target is 2060. Aqua Power's net zero target is 2050. 52% of our assets are renewable, and this is the main service that we provide when working in the global south. So as Janita was mentioning, the most strict in regards let's say the golden standard in regards to ESG communication and guidelines comes out of Europe, followed by the US, and then adapted by China. Now, of course, as Janita mentioned, the US is a little bit on a bit of unstable waters right now, but I'm sure it's still the global agenda will still prevail. Now, for the global south, our priorities are aligned with the final target, but our priorities are different. So if we want to look at, for example, what's important to the European continent, in the European continent, it would be more about climate mitigation, net zero targets, carbon pricing. But in the global south, we have more basic needs, which include energy transition and water security. And this is where Aqua Power comes in. And you mentioned, Janita mentioned China. I think it was Janita that mentioned China, the biggest, largest wind turbine manufacturing. And that's one of our partners. So we work with the innovators, with the technology developers, with the best manufacturing to bring sustainable solutions to the global south. And what we try to do is solve the quadrilemma of the energy transition or the just transition in both energy and water. So sustainability, speed, affordability, and there's a fourth one. I always forget. Okay. It'll come to me again, just like you said,
I
Jihan.
know, there's a lot. It will come, don't worry.
Yes. So affordability, so sustainability, affordability, security, and speed. And so this is what we're focusing on. And our main goal is helping governments that are committed to net zero transition, to help them bring up these, to come up to these targets.
Okay, thank you, Rasha. Nina, I'm coming to you now. There is a lot of misconceptions around renewable energy, such as, for example, wind turbines. A lot of people say, oh, it's very noisy, or it doesn't work that well. How is Nat Power? How are you, as the Chief Marketing Officer, balancing these misconceptions with what the consumers are believing, so that you can explain to the consumers that their perception is incorrect, and that you are showcasing, in fact, that we do need renewable energy for us to survive in the future? Oh no, you're on mute. You're on mute, Nana.
Mute. Thanks, Gian. Think it's definitely an interesting question. It's become part of my day-to-day now with my role within that power. One thing, I don't know if anyone has had the chance to go to any of our social media page to see how, like I mentioned earlier, is to simplify the information, recognize the myth that exists. We call them our myth busting series. Recognize these myths that exist and, bring clarity as to why they are myths, and then also simplify the truth around these information. Because the truth of the matter is a lot of UK residents do not know that we generate a lot of natural power through wind, for example. And no, wind turbines, the noise created, there's minuscule. You probably won't hear anything. We generate quite a bit of it. But then here is the thing, because, and everyone must have experienced with a lot of wind, like even in the past few weeks and, months ago, they happen quite often here in the UK. So when those happen, we generate quite a lot of natural energy. But here's the thing, we don't have infrastructure that allows us store the energy that's not being used by these that are being generated. So what happens is that we actually pay for it, the energy that gets wasted. And I think, was it the Guardian or someone that published recently that up to how many 100 million each year that that gets piled onto the charge that we pay when it comes to accessing renewable energy. So, information like that, we're concerned, no, it's bad, it's noisy, it's this, we don't need it and whatnot. We actually 100% need it in order to make it accessible, by making it affordable and storing it when we're not using it, store it so that we can use it at the time that we need it. So information like this, we understand the complexities that surround this. So what we try to do is simplify the complexity. We have an approach when it comes to education, transparency, and engagement. So from the campaigns that we use, like the ad, which was actually shortlisted for the drum for social impact, we worked directly with our farmers in the areas and got them to testify as to how working with renewable energy businesses, as in that are key in driving energy transition, is beneficial to them as farmers, supporting their legacy, helping create making sure that their land can stand the test of time by being actually with more biodiversity, diversify info, and all of that information. So simplifying that information, breaking it down in a way that they can understand, and using influencers, so the farmers that they can engage with as our forward-facing people when it comes to things like that. So, that's an example there. And then when you have even the complexity of like the maritime, that we're trying to electrify the ports, because the thing is, my CEO likes to call it a chicken and egg situation. The ports, are reluctant to create charging or renewable energy infrastructure because the shipping lines will not want to use it, and the shipping lines do not want to upgrade their vessels to become to use renewable energy because they're concerned that the port authorities or rather the ports won't have the infrastructure they need. So how do we communicate with these two different audiences that we are the go-between that can be able to solve these issues between those two parties? So is all about engagement, simplification, because one of the things a lot of people do is not engage in technologies or things that they do not know a lot about, and which is why we put out OPED, thought leaderships, we put our leaders in front of them to engage at conferences, at panels, sit and have open dialogue and conversation. So that's the credibility, true thought leadership we try to do. So I mentioned simplify complexity, credibility through our thought leaders, being in front of them, and then also addressing concerns proactively. So we actually did have an opposition against one of the projects that recently went into application. And what we did was engage by putting down all the questions that they had, all the misconceptions, and addressing it directly by ensuring that this is something that we're trying to do. And then we also broke it down, made it available to the local media. So this time it was BBC in Yorkshire, where we did interviews and it addressed all the concerns that they had. So by making it proactive and showing that we are not afraid of the engagement because we are transparent and know and believe that what we're doing is going to have the necessary impact. And then we have obviously community and stakeholder engagement by engaging with leaders within the communities or within the sectors. Recently, we engaged with a leader in the farmer section and also experts within soil understanding. And it was so interesting to learn, for example, 90 something percent of the flowers the fresh flowers, hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So that actually over 90 something percent of the fresh flowers we have here in the UK are imported. They're actually not grown here. And actually a lot of the fresh fruits that we have that are mostly imported is mostly grains and whatnot that we actually get in. So that tells you that a lot more can be done in terms of supporting our agricultural landscape here in the UK to ensure that it can feed us even more than it is currently doing. And renewable energy can play a key role in this. So having, community leaders and in industry stakeholders being part of this conversation can also help us to educate and inform the community on why it is important and the role. So my role as the global marketing, communication, and growth director is bringing all these key things together and making them accessible to our audience so that they can be part of what is trying to be done. And whereas also, given what is happening in the US at the moment, this is an opportunity for the UK to stand up in the global landscape and take opportunity of all the investment that is coming in this direction when it comes to renewable as well as fighting climate change in general.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned one of the things you mentioned was transparency. And for me, transparency is key because I think when you are transparent, you are actually protecting yourself from any future damage when it comes to your reputation because you are telling the truth and you're being vulnerable by telling the truth. I always advise our clients to, when they are talking about their sustainability agenda and their ESG reporting and data, I always say to them, if we're not sure about this data, we need to say to our consumers and audience, we are not 100% certain that these data is correct, but we are working towards correcting it. And this is how we're working towards doing so. If you give the reader or your audience a roadmap of what you're doing and how you're doing it, this gives you all the power in the world because no one can come back to you to say, why did you not do so? The most important thing is that you meet your word, though. You can't just say, I'm going to do that, but not do so. Before I ask more questions, is there any questions from our audience? Please raise your hand. Any clarifications needed from what Russia, Janata, or Nena have said?
I think there are some people saying they're in the waiting room. I don't know if there's more people we need to let in.
Oh, is there? Oh, that's Rani's. I can't see them, sadly. Okay, no questions yet? We must be doing a great job in simplifying everything for you then. No comments either? No? Okay. So, Rasha, going to you. Okay, you come from a fossil fuel background. Oh, you come from a fossil fuel background, and now you went into the light. You were in the dark side, you saw the light.
Yes.
Okay, so Rasha, how are you seeing the difference in communication between the dark side versus the light? And what's holding you back when you are trying to communicate something?
Okay. All right. First of all, I do appreciate the binary view as someone that comes from a technical background where we've got zeros and ones, but I would say I've seen the light by moving into corporate affairs and therefore seeing the creative side and realizing that there are 50 shades of gray. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the dark side to the bright side. It's a transition. It is not going to be, turning the taps off and then we can move on to, a nice new utopian world. We discussed at the beginning, coal. Coal is still being burnt as of today, and then there are countries in the world where they are burning cow dung to keep warm, to cook their food. So we still have a very long way until we can say that we're going to be turning off the taps on any fossil fuels. Now, as a comms person, and I know that future and a net zero future, but part of the formula as well is using sustainable conventional fuels or fossil fuels in a smarter way. So, for example, improving the quality of the products, making them more sustainable, producing less carbon emissions, engine technology, and that is happening as we speak. So engines are becoming better. Their carbon capture is happening with fossil fuels. There's ways to mitigate it. I'm not going to beat around the bush. As Aqua Power, I mentioned that we are 52% renewable. The remaining are not renewable, but we are making a transition. We are making a target towards net zero, but the net zero is not going to look like zero fossil fuel. What it will be is mitigating the carbon emissions that are coming from the conventional energy sources. In regards to communication, what you mentioned earlier and your advice to your clients about being vulnerable and being honest is still a key advice, whether it's conventional or even renewable. Even in renewable, you can misspeak and misrepresent information or overpromise and provide a perception of a utopian environment, which is not realistic. So I think honesty, being direct, being balanced in your communication is a critical thing for renewables or for conventionals.
I also think it needs to be relatable as well. I think the power that renewables play or have is the fact that rather than focusing on the technicalities of how renewables work, we can now focus on what effect it has on our lives,
exactly.
on the future, on our communities. Do you agree?
Yes, I completely agree. And I'll give you an example on that. So let's take, for an example, country X. Country X currently does not have any natural resources of conventional energy. Therefore, and renewable is too expensive. Country X relies on importing natural gas or oil from other countries. Therefore, there is a dependency. There's a geopolitical dependency on a different country. What we do at Aqua Power is because we continue to compete with ourselves. We actually have a conference next week that is our own owned event on innovation, because in the space of renewables, innovation is key to being able to make it available and supporting a just transition and accessible to countries that are in the global south. So innovation helps, improve energy availability, reduce cost. So when we come into a country and we help them foster the natural resources that they have, whether it's wind, whether it's sun, and therefore make them independent and able to depend only on their natural resources, which they've had, but weren't able to attain because of, cost of renewable technologies, then you create an entity or a country that is able to rely on itself and depend on itself, and they can wean off being dependent on third countries. And we've all seen it. We don't need to, we can name several examples. One of them is what's happening in Eastern Europe and the dilemma of dependency on other countries, and how that has happened and has created difficulties for other first world countries. And so that supports your discussion about renewables is not just about the technology or the sound, or it's about what's in it for you. You can tell a narrative through a story that this helps you as a country, as a government, as a nation become independent, and it makes you more resilient.
And speaking about resilience, Janata, you are very popular today with questions. You have mentioned that there is an EU clarification coming next month. Can you please explain for us? That is coming from Chris Tucker. Hi, Chris.
Sure. So the clarification is called Omnibus Simplification Package.
Oh gosh.
That's the fancy name, or Omnibus Regulation. And what happened in the EU after the two directives, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, together with the EU taxonomy, where started coming in force for some companies gradually, there is a timeline. It became overwhelming. There are a lot of data points to collect. So in November last year, EU announced that it will bring them together into a simplified framework without the overlapping, essentially acknowledging the overlaps and consolidating. So in February, next month, the rumors are 25th of February, but it could be by the end of February. Let's give them some leeway. We are expecting this omnibus to come out and give us some consolidation. So combine CSRD, CSDDD, and EU taxonomy into one disclosure framework. Therefore, every regulation has around 300 pages. So simplifying it for lawyers and also for the corporations themselves. Also, there is a rumor that 25% of the requirements will be reduced without compromising the substance of each framework. So potentially they will identify the overlapping points, take them out, and you will be left only with one data point, for example, to report on or assess. The timeline is rumored to be adjusted as well, and the scope. So right now it's almost, if you ask anybody about CSRD, the timeline and the scope, CSDDD, those questions can be answered and you pay a lot of money, but it's much better to wait until the end of February and get advice on these clarification package. Right now, something has been leaked from it, but again, it's almost reading reading somebody's diary to get to their state of mind currently. It's not going to help if you get advice on something that has been leaked unofficially, and because it's just a month, waiting and then getting advice on that consolidation can be much more helpful.
Okay, well, Susie have shared what it is from a company called ERM. You have another question, Janata. And the second one is from Kylie Campbell. Hi, Kylie. Given the rising volume of greenwashing litigation, what steps can corporations take to mitigate legal risks so that we ensure we don't fall into the greenwashing bucket, but also to ensure compliance?
Yeah, there are huge legal risks there. A lot of them are reputational because these greenwashing lawsuits are oftentimes publicized and you are kind of all over media. Um, the best steps to take is to, and I speak from very practical experience. First of all, if you don't have capacity internally, people who actually understand what it means to be net zero, if you have a net zero target, how certainty needs to be acknowledged, train these people, make sure that they understand the vocabulary and then understand the science. And that's hard, right? Because sustainability is an intersection of science, business, and law, right? And none of us is perfect in all of them. So you need to really hit that sweet spot of having people who understand all of them to the point they need to. So definitely train people internally, but that's a long-term strategy, right? Because it takes time to devise and train people internally that way. The short-term strategy is if you don't have internal knowledge and capacity to consult externally. And again, I refer to lawyers, but I often, and this addresses Jihan's point, which is competent and the competent lawyers who understand also your business and the fact that you want to communicate, who provide clarity rather than scrape your communication, because that is, the kind of black and rule way that some lawyers are taught to approach comms. And the example I can give you is be very specific with the comms. So I had one of the aviation clients I worked for example, they wanted to advertise their hydrogen investments in the UK. And they were an airline that operated only transatlantic flights from the UK. So, we look at the comms, and when you look at the science behind hydrogen, to date, hydrogen has only been tested on short-haul flights. So if you advertise hydrogen to UK-based customer, who you are advertising long-haul flights only, you are greenwashing because there is no scientific evidence yet that the hydrogen can replace long-haul flights. And the reason why they didn't know this was lack of capacity internal, lack of knowledge. They just didn't do the research on hydrogen, which came to them consulting externally with my team because they needed that expertise. And the second thing you can do in the meantime, the long-term goal is to train and get the capacity internally. The second second step you can take is to create tools where your in-house legal team communicates with the marketing and comms professionals at the very beginning of devising the communication. And the way you can do that is by, for example, and this is another thing I did for a client, you can get lawyers develop these, I call it a decision-making trees. So almost it's a series of questions and answers, which could be color-coded. So, red, green, and orange when there is a middle ground. And your marketing and comms team would be able to go through these questions, not knowing that there is law behind them, right? Because they don't have to know the legal structure behind them, but they are legally correct. And then from the very beginning of devising the comms, if they arrive at the red color coding, red square, they will know that they need to consult lawyers. And that was another thing that I did for clients, because what I saw was they would reach out to lawyers a day before a campaign, right? It was like a last thing we have to do. We have to do a legal check. And that's extremely, first of all, it's hard crashing because lawyers will always come back with something you need to rewrite. And then it's postponement, a lot of costs. People's, ambitions are kind of changed. So you need to be very careful. There is a people management aspect there. If you give your comms professional something which is legally sound, but very customer friendly, which is not a memorandum explaining law, but a decision-making tree, from the very beginning, as they're devising the campaign, they will know which points they need to consult lawyers on and which points are easier and they can actually have a bit more creative freedom. And I think I saw, that particular client improve their comms incredibly. And also it meant that they need less legal advice at the end of the day. And their campaigning was much more streamlined.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think another advice that I would also add to what Janata was saying is test your message with 3 personas in your company, with the expert, with the cynic, and with the passionate. Because when you test it with these personalities, you will know if you're on the right track and towards green, as in away from greenwashing, or you are on the wrong track. Rasha, you sit on the senior leadership team in Aqua Power.
Yeah,
And so you have direct engagement with the board as well, correct?
correct.
Okay, so in the Middle East, where there is no legislative reporting standards that provide variable information and sustain substantially point of for comms, how do you bring the board with you in that journey?
Sure. So thank you, Victoria, for that question. I read it in full. And I would argue that this is not only the Middle East, but this is the global South. So the global South in general don't have, strict, stringent standards that they need to abide to. And in my opinion, the reason that this doesn't exist yet is because, as I'm sure you know, in the West or the global North, this does cost money. You need your subject matter experts, you need to collect data, you need to report on it, you need to get third parties to verify it, you need to bring in consultants to help you. So it is not an easy task to implement it. And therefore, in my opinion, I think that the legislation doesn't exist yet. And the reason is because they don't want to add more burden to countries in the global South that are already trying to catch up to the global North. It is coming. So the countries themselves have put targets. Right now, it is voluntary, but there will come a time when the voluntary becomes mandatory. And so they're giving companies that flexibility to start it themselves, to start getting, their feet wet, dipping their toes into legislation about how to report on ESG before it comes mandatory. But it is coming down the line. Now, what we need to do as comms people is advocate. So it's the basics, sales pitch, as Nina was talking earlier. So transitioning from, commercial, retail, marketing and selling people products to convincing management, telling them what's in it for them, showing them the bottom line of how this is going to help them mitigate risks in the future and be ahead of the bell curve in regards to regulations. So yes, I agree. It doesn't exist yet, but it's coming. And our role is to advocate and sell.
Perfect. Nena, last but not least, you also sit as part of the senior leadership team in that power. How are you seeing the regulation, specifically with nature? So nature regulation is an enigma slightly because it's still coming in and we're really not on top of it as much as we are on top of the ones related to climate, for example. How do you bring the board and the SLT with you when it comes to regulations that they're not aware of or it's new to them?
I think so, for example, we have a very amazing legal team that sits within our company. Our head of legal, Alex, is quite on board with these information and updating with legislations, regulations, even now around the foundation that we're setting up, certain things on what can be said, what is allowed, and so on. So he's quite on the ball with those things. And, if we also tend to stay in the know with what's relevant around our business. For example, for renewable energy companies, you are committed to develop the land in which you're using for your assets to grow its biodiversity by at least 10%.
Yeah.
While we here at Nat Power, we are committing to actually achieve up to 100% of that target because it's our intention to have the land better than we found it. So when you consider, for example, the EU Green Claims Initiative and even the Nature Restoration Law and how it influences our corporate practices like ours, it sets a higher standards in the sense that of what we can claim and the impact on reporting. And we recognize this because we are working with experts within the industry to actually set up positions within where we have our assets to help us deliver on these biodiversity commitments. So we're going to test the land, confirm the grade it is now, confirm how it is, as we progress, educate, and also carry the community along during this process, creating further opportunity within the community, educating the farmers and people involved so that they can take part in actually bringing their community up while staying actually delivering on this legislation. So what is the fact-based claims certified? So the verbal claims that we can do, how can we ensure that this is real? So check, test, make the data that we've tested publicly available so that we're transparent, and also keep abreast as we progress and deliver on it. So at the moment, what we're saying is that is our intention to deliver 100%, as opposed to saying we definitely will, so that we carry people along the journey with us as we try to hit this intention, and not commit to saying something that we cannot do, because that will be greenwashing. And so then embedding this restoration into our narrative. So with everything that we do, how do you embed that? Not just so with the commitments we make, even on our website, we have what is called our impact, how we intend to deliver this, the experts that we'll be working with in order to deliver these aspects as well. And then also keeping on top of when things continue to grow and progress. It might be, okay, so what's the UK law versus the EU law? How is that relevant? What we try to do as a business is do it as a bit of like a blanket rule, so that either way we are complying, whether it's UK or EU in general. So it makes it easier. We do know what the difference between those locations are, but then making it a blanket way of working makes it easier for us to apply, so that we're not caught up when we miss out on one or the other. So, that's kind of how we try to stay on top of these things as a business. It can be complicated, but having the right lawyers in-house to work with and support is key. Having the right type of agency to work with as well, which is why, when we look at the PR and strategy agency we work with, it makes it easier when we work with actually experts within sustainability, climate change, and even renewable energy as a subject, so that we are covered on all bases.
Excellent. Well, we're bang right on time. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Susie, for kicking us off. And if anyone would like to get in touch with all of you, are you on LinkedIn? Are you active on LinkedIn? Okay. So
Trying to.
Okay. Trying to. Please get in touch with our panelists. If there is anything we can help you as the ESG panel of experts, the CIPR, please also reach out to myself and Susie, where we can guide you through.
Absolutely.
Okay? Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.